Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're new here, I'm Purnima Farah. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Rival, and I'm joined here by Greg DiTullio, who's our CEO. At Rival, we focus on serving HR teams around the globe every day. And today we're going to talk to you about analytics. We want to talk to you about, what we hear in the market about how analytics is leveraged, how HR teams are leveraging analytics to make informed decisions, how we help them convert that into actionable insights, and more importantly, how all of this helps build stronger teams and long lasting companies. Most recently, we launched advanced analytics into our workflow product. For those of you who may not be familiar with our workflow product, it essentially focuses on making workflow. So it starts from our, early employee journeys as candidates coming into pre-boarding steps, all the way through the life cycle of onboarding, offboarding, and every step in between. So, in a solution like this, having a scalable analytic component is absolutely critical. So, with me today is Greg, who, like me, has spent a lot of time in people and data products, and we can't wait to talk to you more about, the state of the market, how our customers are leveraging these capabilities today, as well as, learn more from all of you who are listening to us on how things are going. So, Greg, tell me a little bit about the challenges that you hear from HR teams, as in terms of what they're facing today and the metrics that they're tracking to make informed decisions.
Absolutely. Purnima, thanks for having me again, too, by the way. You brought me in to talk about analytics, which you know is one of my favorite topics.
Yes, it is.
Um, so we're hitting some of the big challenges at the head. And I think when you talk about challenges in the context of HR and data analytics, we could spend probably 3 weeks on this session, but I don't think our listeners would spend that much time. So we'll try to keep it brief. Let's hit the top three challenges that I would bring all the way to the top as it relates to HR and particularly HR and analytics. So I think that the first challenge is when you think about data and analytics in HR, it sits in a lot of different places. I think the average number of tools in an HR tech stack is somewhere in the 15 to 20 range. And despite having multiple tools, that being kind of one problem, part B of that problem is that most of the tools individually have insufficient analytics capabilities built in themselves. So that's, I see as challenge number one.
Mhm.
Challenge number two is, data engineering or data science resources dedicated to HR are really, really large investments. And in all of our travels, I would say they are by far the exception versus the rule. And that's even the case for, big companies with mature people science functions. When you think about it, like a small team, even a tiny team to focus on this in HR, equipped with the staff and the tools, I mean, you're talking easily well north of $500,000 in annual expense. So it's something that's just not attainable to many of our HR practitioners to help solve that challenge with sophisticated infrastructure and analytics power. The third challenge, just to further complicate the topic, is HR wears a lot of hats when it comes to supporting their organization. And they orchestrate a multitude of scale business processes that, may or may not exist on paper. And when they're not on paper, they're most likely not reconcilable to a system of record. And that creates a lot of day-to-day measurability gaps in just things that are kind of the natural course of the day and tasks that they may have to solve for. So just to give you some examples of that, an end-to-end benefits enrollment or orchestrating a compensation change process with approvals or your merit cycle, the round trip of administering leave of absence, right? These are like things that happen every day in HR and they're processes, but they might exist on a piece of paper, but maybe not aligning to a single system of record. And in today's headlines, the nasty L word, layoffs, right? Things that are typically done in spreadsheets or emails and Slack messages, like despite their criticality, there's a lot of business processes that just don't reconcile the systems. And when that's the case, their ability to be measurable, despite their big impact on the business, it's just not there. So, the end result when we talk about HR and analytics, I think of Swiss cheese, which if we're talking about food that is delicious, but if we're talking about it in the context of measurability, there's just a lot of holes.
Absolutely. You know, it's so interesting that you said that. I mean, the challenges that come up in terms of first looking at where the data sits, then the infrastructure to actually build an analysis, and then even when you do all of that work, the systems are not connected. So even if you can report on some of your activities, most of the events that happen still end up being outside of the system. Common one is bonus and comp, right? We see that all the time. HCM systems build out really complex tools, but then often the actual analysis ends up having to come outside of the system because all of the work that is required is just so nuanced and complicated. And then in our world, as you said, working on events of any kind, leaves, layoffs. I'm trying to think of a third L word that really come together in terms of the various events that end up happening, become really important. So, of those three challenges, maybe we pick one and we dive deeper into that. Let's talk about infrastructure because, as we both know, despite all of the work that has really gone into the uh, technology ecosystem on making the infrastructure robust and scalable, there are still challenges in terms of just being able to start up quickly on analytic needs. And so, from an HR team perspective, um, what are some good tips that you can think of, or that you've seen, in your journeys that you would offer?
A simple one comes to mind because I know a lot of our audience is probably not going to be on the hyper technical side or thinking about complex data infrastructure. Let's talk about something that could be super addressable. So if you're a listener, let's assume you have the basic operational metrics in place in HR. Operational metrics like funnel performance, time to hire, time to onboarding, selection rates, cost per hire, attrition. Let's assume that you have some of those basics in place. But you have a lot of the prerequisite challenges that we were discussing earlier. A quick pro tip, an often overlooked step, is really taking the time up front to define the drill down segmentations of your data that matter most to the organization to ensure that the tools that you do have, let's just assume you don't have a whole BI architecture supporting you, just ensuring that you're creating the foundational data structure that you need when it comes to reporting. Now this sounds kind of complicated, but let me break it down. So it's key when you think about the segmentation of HR data when it comes to telling the real story of what's happening in your organization. If you have the aggregate statistics, like that's a really good start. But as HR practitioners, when you think about the different business units, the job categories, the geographies, the sources, or even looking at recruiter level, the benchmarks against those segments are absolutely critical, and that's really where the story sits.
Mhm.
So just as a quick pro tip, if you think about defining your metrics hierarchy up front, it will help you understand whether or not your tools are set up to generate the necessary data for your desired reporting structure. And this is most ideal to do when you're first implementing a solution. But if it's too late, it's something you can usually fix pretty easily by making some intentional configurations so that the data go forward provides the output that you need to provide the different cuts of any individual or multiple system that you might be extracting data and reporting from as a result.
Spoken like someone that's built a lot of dashboards. Start with talking about what you want the dashboard to actually tell you about, and then once you know that, then start to look at the data, especially in the context of models, measures, dimensions. And once we have those layers in place, then we can move into visualizations. So let's say that we have all of our data modeling in place. What's next?
That's probably the more complex piece, at least that we see with HR teams. So I think, as I mentioned before, if you start before you build any type of system with an idea of how you want to measure the data that it outputs, that's a really good start. You can fix it again with configurations, like I mentioned earlier. But once you do all that, which is again a foundational first step, the next challenge that you run into is data visualization. And this is where things can get really, really complicated for HR, especially if you don't have the data engineering resources, or perhaps you don't have a business intelligence platform that's accessible to you within the HR function. So what we see there most commonly is, I think what we all see in our kind of day-to-day lives working in an organization is that all roads lead back to some really labor intensive Excel work. And particularly within HR, you see this across any individual role type within HR. It could be a recruiter, it could be an HRIS analyst. They're spending a lot of time exporting data, cleaning and structuring that data, and then building graphs in Excel.
Yeah.
And this can work, as we all do, right? This works totally fine for one-time insights, but for an HR operation, this becomes, increasingly cumbersome with repetition. And the big challenge with data being, once you spot a trend or an insight in your data, the answer is always incomplete. Data is a very addicting, never-ending process where there's a continuous need to dig deeper and deeper and drill down. And that's why having that kind of data hierarchy and segmentation of what matters in terms of how to report within your business is super important upfront. But when it comes to visualization, that creates the opportunity to get really sophisticated. But if you're using tools like Excel, you're going to run out of horsepower really, really quickly. So in recognizing this gap, as you know, Parma, our strategy here at Rival has been focused on simplifying analytics for HR by embedding that enterprise-grade business intelligence capabilities directly within our products so that you don't have to go through that entire motion of modeling, cleaning, and visualizing in an external system. We just want to give it to you right at your fingertips.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to your point, the more we know what kind of questions we want to answer, the better the ecosystem is in terms of our ability to build that answer. But at the end of the day, it's really getting the team started with this. That is our core focus area at Rival. There's so much that can be derived from good analytics, and having the right metrics and the right dashboards is everything. Um, so walk us through, Greg, our journey here over the last year and a half. You and I have done this hand in hand, but tell us a little bit about how we've not just helped teams get started with this, but your favorite stories if you have any, as well as what you would encourage others to do out there.
Yeah, if you're an HR team, especially one that doesn't have the resources, as I mentioned earlier, the hardest part is just getting started because it can feel super daunting, especially in context of, 15 to 20 applications that you might be dealing with. Um, you know, there's countless things that you can measure. And just to give some context, our talent acquisition solution, our data model has over 1,000 dimensions and measures alone. Right.
Mhm.
So there's so much potential and so much possibility. But if you're just getting started with this, it can be very, very daunting. Um, Seeing this, especially in working closely with customers, we try to solve for this by starting users with turnkey dashboards. So a library that can cover every angle of operational performance that drills into aggregate insights down to all the segmentations of the customer's business. So think like geos or divisions or sources, all the way down to benchmarking recruiters for a complete view. It's such an important first step when you're using a business intelligence tool for the first time that you have some standards to get you started. And we've taken the time to visualize all of the primary metrics that you think would be interesting to a user, to get them to understand their data, to understand it visualized, and then to create that ideation and creativity that can follow, which from there leads to customers having the ability to not just look at a static Excel report or look at a static dashboard that's not editable. You really want to enable the user to drill in and do self-service exploration of the entire data model, take the things that we've created and create bespoke versions of it, slice and dice a report by a different measure or dimension, visualize a comparison of data points that are in the model but might not be presented to them out of the box. Give them that ability to do that type of work without having the support of a dedicated data analyst or an engineer that actually has to facilitate the work in the model in order for you to even be able to begin to experiment. So I think for us, we really encourage our customers to get started with standards, but then enable them to get into the more sophisticated power user type activities. And we've seen great success with that in Rival Recruit, which we've had this capability live for a little over a year, and are
Mhm.
really excited about the GA release in Rival Workflow that was just launched this week to open up to almost 1 billion workflows we process directly into data visualization for customers.
Absolutely. And, often we find that a lot of the processes that we support in Rival Workflow exist out there on paper. or they
Yes.
exist in a very disjointed way, right? So you may have a leave process, but that's often requiring multiple tools, multiple systems, a lot of Slack or Teams conversations, and being able to centralize a lot of that is really the first step in terms of building the analytic layer on the back end to then say, okay, this is how long a process is taking. This is the information that you need to make informed decisions on what's happening in your organization. So I know how closely involved you've been with this. So tell me a little bit about the day-to-day measurability gaps. What is the most common set of gaps that you have seen? And we'll talk from there about how we're addressing those gaps in workflow.
Yeah, this is a topic that doesn't come up a lot too. So this is a really good one. As I mentioned earlier, the common culprits in terms of the Swiss cheese are HR workflows. They're invisible. And for our HR practitioners on the line, some of those examples I gave earlier around administering a leave of absence or executing a restructuring process, like those are really meaty topics. They take a lot of work, a lot of execution, a lot of team bandwidth. And as you can imagine, given the importance of those topics, those are things that you would want to have some visibility over, some governance over. You want to be able to identify continuous improvement on them. But in the reality, even for very large orgs, these are processes that just may or may not exist on paper. They're definitely not reconcilable to systems. And that's creating a huge challenge. When you think about some of the headlines that come out today where there are, changes that may impact 20, 30,000 employees at a time, but they're still being managed in a spreadsheet. Workflows are kind of the invisible problem within an HR organization. And, a good example of this that we see that occurs on a day-to-day basis is actually the enterprise onboarding process or the offboarding process. You could kind of use both of these interchangeably. When you think about an onboarding process, those are when we look at a larger enterprise, call it organizations hiring 5 to 10,000 more employees a year, companies that have compliance steps in the process. It's very, very common for those organizations to have 100 or more steps end to end scattered across multiple teams and multiple tool sets. And while the process might be identified and defined, it's usually governed by a PowerPoint slide, and it's definitely not automated or measurable. Now, this might not be a huge deal if you're managing 100 or so workflows a year, 100 onboarding, 100 offboarding. But when you're orchestrating it at scale, it just feels like herding cats blindly without grip and control on where a single individual may sit in the process, let alone how the process is performing overall end to end, if it's compliant, and how it's changing over time. So if it sounds like you and you've got some of those invisible processes, please contact us through our website. We can definitely help.
Sounds good. Yes, indeed. Well, Greg, thank you so much for your time. It is always fun to chat with you about all of these topics, and I know that we have so much more ground to cover. As we've gone through this journey on analytics, we're seeing some powerful insights already emerge across our client base. We're seeing industry trends, we're seeing market trends. So hopefully, we can cover one of that in one of our future conversations. And thank you everyone for joining. I'm Purnima Farah, and we are here via Rival.
Thanks, Porma.